Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cilla Refinaldo. I have a bachelor degree in mechanical engineering and transportation, and I am currently working at Technip Energies in Mozambique as a local content officer. Today, we are going to host one episode of the Energized Saga, and this episode is sponsored. It's one of the programs from the MWE, Mozambique Women of Energy. For those of you who are yet not aware or familiarized with MWE, Mozambican Women of Energy is a group of passionate professionals determined to work together to identify areas of action and empowerment to change the narrative of Mozambique. We target gender equality and equal access to energy to empower the female future leaders of our country. And our focus is to inspire, empower, and support young energy leaders to make an impact, both local and at an international level. So in order to achieve this mission, we hold ourselves in 4 pillars, which are think, lead, connect, and build. And the Energized Saga is part of the build pillar, where we aim to build capacities to young professionals in order to make sure that they have a smooth insertion in the practical and work environment. So we are aware that courses and information regarding the LNG industry, they are not available at easy sources. So we created this Energized Saga to make sure that young engineers and young graduates can have access to information like this. We have hosted a couple of episodes on which we went in depth about the operational and engineering and process related to the LNG. And today we are going to take a short shift because we're not going to be in the process department, I would say, but today we are going to take a look in the sales and marketing department because we need to also know how the production and all the process compounds in the LNG value chain can affect the sales, marketing, and production. And for that, we have no one that is better to approach this topic than Loide, Chebeia, and she will follow up and make the presentation regarding this topic today. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is keeping safe given the current pandemic situation. And I would like to thank you for taking the time to join me in this session today. And thank you, Mozambique Women of Energy, for inviting me for this session. I actually feel that these sections are very good to exchange experiences and to network. So I hope I get to be invited again because LNG market is such a broad topic, and there is a lot of things to share about it. All right, so for those of you who do not know me, this is Loide speaking. I am from Mozambique. And I was born and raised in Mozambique, and I work for the National Oil and Gas Company, ENH. But the LNG business I really started working on the LNG business in 2014 when I joined the Mozambique LNG project marketing team. So that's when I started to learn about the LNG industry. And since then, I've been in the business, and I really enjoy working in the business. So I hope you guys feel this presentation interesting. I hope you find it interesting. And please, if there is any questions, feel free to ask. I think there's a chat room that you can use, or you can raise your hand through the Zoom option, and I will try my best to answer as much as possible. So let me start by sharing my screen with you. I understand that if you guys are following the sessions organized by the Mozambique Women in Energy, they are touching and the LNG value chain. So there has been some topics on the LNG value chain and transportation that has already been discussed in these forums. But I would, this is the topic of sales and marketing. We'll also touch a little bit on the value chain as well. So let me just let you know what topics we will cover today. So we'll start with the LNG value chain because I think that it's important to just to recap this topic, and we will touch it on a very high level, and then we'll pass to the nature of the LNG business, and then we'll go through the agreement between the buyer and the seller, and we'll touch a little bit more in detail this agreement because I feel like I think that this is the most important agreement in the LNG market, and I want you to understand the process to get to it. And then we will also talk about the market participants, more on the buyer side, who are the buyers, because I think that the idea is you to get to know, to understand who are the buyers of this product. And then we will touch on the emerging markets of LNG, the traditional and emerging market, and you will see that on the slides. We will also touch on LNG pricing, and you will see the difference there is a certain specificity in the LNG business. I think that's what makes it very, very interesting. And then we will talk about what happened last year in terms of LNG importing countries, exporting countries, a little bit about what happened last year on the price side of the business. And then we will see a little bit of supply and demand, because supply and demand is key for the business. So, and then finally, we will address some of the key changes in the market. So I hope you guys find it interesting. If you guys, I don't know, sometimes my mic tends to be not very good. I hope you guys can hear me clearly. If not, please, the organizers, let me know if I start fading. All right. For the LNG, I would like to start with the LNG value chain, and mostly because I find interesting to understand the value chain and how the links connect to each other, so you can understand the nature of the business. So we will start with the LNG definition of LNG, which is the basic. So to start with the definition of LNG, what is LNG exactly, right? The LNG is just gas that is super cooled, and it's turned into liquid. So when it's turned into liquid, it allows us to transport it to a long distance market. So the only reason project sponsors liquefy gas is to be able to access markets that are that are located in a very high distance when compared to the liquefaction plant. That is the main reason. So how do we do this? So you extract the gas from the gas reservoir, and the gas is transported through pipelines to the liquefaction plant. So in the liquefaction plant, this gas is chilled to a minus 162 degrees Celsius. And by chilling it in that way, it transforms it into its liquid state. And by doing that, we are reducing its volume to about 600. So you see, you can transport a lot more gas when you liquefy it. So When this gas is liquefied, now it's LNG, because LNG stands for liquefied natural gas. When this gas is liquefied, now LNG, it's then loaded into vessels. These are special designed vessels to keep as maximum as possible the specification of the LNG. And then this ship or LNG vessel takes the LNG all the way to the receiving terminal. So in the receiving terminal, this LNG is then warmed up and then transformed it into gas again, and then it's distributed downstream. So in a simple way, and not getting into a lot of details, this is what happens in the LNG value chain. So the LNG is mostly used to generate power. And we will see it in today's session. What we want to see is the link between the liquefaction plant and those who are in the receiving terminal side. So let's see in the next slide. Let's talk about the LNG, the nature of the LNG business. The LNG business is a capital intensive business. So we are talking about $20+ billion. So it requires a deep pocket. So that's why, because of this specificity, you have to find your buyer first. You find your buyer first, and then you can build your plant. You cannot build your plant before because of the high investments that are required in the business, to construct your LNG plant. So you find your buyer first, and this buyer has to be a credit-worthy buyer, so it can provide confidence to the lenders so that they can finance your project. Mostly these projects require project finance. So project finance, you need a credit-worthy buyer. Normally are the buyers that have been in the industry for quite a long time. They have a good track record in the industry. Those are the buyers that, if you see all the export LNG countries, we are all, you will see later in the slides, that we are all looking for the same market. So the LNG is not a liquid market. While it's evolving, it's not as advanced as crude oil. So crude oil, you can basically sell it. There is a lot of buyers, a lot of sellers for it. You can build your plant, and there is already a buyer to buy your product. And the LNG is the other way around. There is not, although it's evolving, there is not a lot of buyers and sellers as in the crude oil or LPG market. That's why I say it's not a liquid market. So in the crude oil, you can basically have a quick transaction. But LNG, you will see that it's a very relationship-based business. Why? Because of the nature of the long-term contracts that are associated to underpin your project. So you need long-term contracts. When I say long-term, I say 15+ years. And then these contracts normally have to have take-or-pay clauses. Why take-or-pay clauses? The take-or-pay clauses works as, if your buyer doesn't take your LNG, they still have to pay you for that specific LNG. So in that way, you are securing a stable revenues that can underpin your project and provide confidence to the lenders so that they can support your project. That's how it works. I hope this was clear enough. And then let's move to the agreement. This agreement is called LNG Sales and Purchase Agreement. And it pretty much governs the sales and purchase of LNG from seller between buyer and the seller, right? So this is not a straightforward negotiation. It takes time. It takes commitment. So it takes about, let's say, my experience, let's say roughly 2 years. So there is a process for it, right? Think about when you start dating someone, and then you get to the marriage level, right? So there is a typical road for SPA. So take this origination that you're seeing here on the first bubble, let's say, originations. Think about it as your first date. So this is a conceptual phase. You exchange a little bit about your project, but you have to have a confidentiality agreement, because this agreement will prevent both parties to release information that it's not supposed to be released, right? So you sign this, you have your CA, parties start, okay, let's start discussions about this project, and then they move to the term sheet discussion. Think about the term sheet discussion now that we are talking about relationships. Think about it as your proposal, right? And your proposal, this is where parties start formalizing the discussions. They discuss and identify key terms that are vital for both buyer and the seller. And then they move to the HOA part, which is the engagement. And then in the HOA part, what they do, it's just they formalize that they have the intention to negotiate and execute an SPA. This agreement, it's not binding. So either party can walk away from this agreement. However, history has proved that when you reach this level of HOA, there are strong intention from both parties to move forward. So most of the time, when you reach this stage, you start negotiating your SPA. Yay, you are on your marriage stage, right? The SPA. So when you think about it, it's a very extensive and very detailed document. Why? Because both parties, buyer and the seller, they try to include most specificities and most terms that can have impact or that can influence the buying and the selling of LNG. So this contract, when executed, it turns into binding. So this contract binding means that buyer have the obligation to take the LNG, and seller, or if the buyer doesn't pay the LNG, and seller has the obligation to deliver the LNG. So this process, as you can see, it takes time. You have to build a relationship with your counterparty. You have to build enough confidence that your project is moving forward. And when I'm talking about this as on the perspective of project sponsor type of, right? So you need to build this relationship. You need to build that confidence on the buyer to actually support your project. Because by buying your LNG, if you are a project developer, then this buyer is supporting your project, because you need them to build your plant if you don't have, right? All right, so let's dive on this document, right? The SPA. So I subdivided the SPA into these three categories. So there isn't a standard version of SPA in the market, but you can find some, but I believe each project has its own SPA design and that they use with the buyers, right? So, but mostly, most of the clauses, these are very critical clauses for SPA negotiation. I would say supply area, of course. Buyers want to know where this gas is coming from. And you will learn in this presentation that security of supply is critical for the buyer. So they want to know if the reserves, you see here, if the reserves that you have are enough to meet their demand, are enough to meet the contract that they are entering into with you. And then, for instance, let's touch on the delivery point. The delivery point, depending, which is in the receiving terminal, depending on your business model. There are business model which the delivery point, instead, if you recall the LNG value chain, instead of being in the receiving terminal, it's in the loading port where you load your vessel. You load the LNG into the vessel. Think about that first image that I brought when I started the presentation. So instead of that, the delivery point may be in the LNG loading terminal. So in that case, this delivery is called what? It's called FOB delivery. And then there is a business model. So there is no shipping risk for the project sponsors. Instead, the ship or the LNG vessel is brought forward to your LNG plant, and then your work is just to load that ship, and the buyer takes the risk of transportation. And then you have another business model, which is called deliver X ship. So you as a project, it's when you as a project take the transportation risk. So you take the LNG all the way to the receiving terminal. So there is no involvement of buyer transportation on that. You as the seller is responsible to, I'm sorry, I was thinking about the verb. You as the seller, you are responsible to take the LNG all the way to receiving terminal. So this is called DES. And these are the most common type of delivery methodologies in the LNG business. And then you have the contract quantities clause. The contract quantity clause is normally a big one. You have to declare, both parties agree on the quantity, annual contract quantity. Mostly buyer says that, hey, I need this much quantity of LNG each year, right? And then you put on your take-or-pay clause to safeguard stable revenues. So let me just keep going with this. There is LNG delivery programming. So where both parties set out the estimated delivery program that they would like to have each year. The quality of LNG is very important because mostly the specification needs to meet the buyer's downstream sales or requirements in terms of specification. And there is price. Both parties agree on price, and there is price review. That price review mostly historically, if you think about the beginning of the LNG industry, there wasn't any price review in the contracts. But now you're seeing a lot of price review, mostly to accommodate the changes in the market and sometimes protect both parties on with the changes on the market side, on the price side of the business. So, and then you have the technical part, which I added as sellers and buyers facilities. Of course, each part wants to know, the seller wants to know where to deliver, and specifically if this seller is taking the transportation risk, then this seller needs to know if that vessel, the vessels on their fleet will be compatible with the buyer's facilities so that they can safely unload the LNG. So this is a very critical component on the LNG shipping side of the business. The ships, when you have to make sure that it's compatible with the LNG, with the receiving terminal. And then there are other clauses like taxes, payment security, force majeure, which also is a force majeure is a very it's a clause that requires a lot of debate or a lot of negotiation, because it's pretty much it's a clause that can relieve either party to perform its obligations under the SPA. So as you can see, it's a very thick document, and it requires a lot of time to review, a lot of commitment between the two parties, and a lot of negotiation sessions. Let's just take a deep breath and turn the page into the LNG market overview. So let's think about who buys this LNG, right? As I mentioned, you have to know first who buys your LNG before you build your plant, right? So normally or historically, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, they have been the home for the LNG that is sold in the markets, especially because they wanted to replace some of the portion of oil that they used with the gas. So, and then in early 2000s, India and China joined the LNG market, and they've been registering a lot of growth in terms of demand, especially because these countries, if you look at it, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, China, they are big countries and high industrialized countries. So they required a lot of energy. And mostly, if you think about it, they burned a lot of coal for power generation. So there was a need also to replace or to reduce the consumption of coal into power plants so that they can have a better environment. Coal, if burned, it creates a lot of pollution. And in today's era, if you see, there is a lot of concerns about climate change. So these countries are driven also by the environment concern with respect of burning coal and oil. So they are turning into an LNG which doesn't have a lot of emissions as coal and oil, right? So, but security of supply still very much something that something that buyers are looking for. So that's why you see that they diversify their sources of supply, right? In terms of LNG, they sign contracts with a variety of projects and suppliers so that they can have and they can keep the standards of their economies. And then you have the European market. European market, I would say that they work as a balance to the LNG market. They have a very well-established gas network, pipelines. They have storages, underground storages to store LNG. They have hubs, very well developed. So they are able, when there is a flood of LNG in the market, they are able to absorb LNG and keep it. So when the winter is very cold, they can at least make use of those to generate energy. And there is the third block, which are the emerging markets. These emerging markets, we'll talk about them a little bit more on the next slide. But these emerging markets, they also have a need to change to, they are also in demand of LNG on the coal to gas switch. So they are turning coal-fired power plants, and they are reducing the consumption of coal and increasing the consumption of gas, especially because of what I explained before of environmental concerns. And some of these emerging markets, they were also exporters, but you will see that the dome gas that they produce is reducing. So they have the need to supplement that decrease in the domestic gas with more LNG so that they can meet their demand for energy. So in this graph here, what you will see is that Asia, you see this yellowish, orange type of bars, color, you see this LNG is all for Asia. So Asia has been consistently being the home for LNG because of the reason of that I've just explained. So they need a more cleaner source of energy. They need to diversify their source of energy. They need to work on their climate change. So that's why they are the home for the LNG as of now. All right, let's talk about the emerging LNG markets. So the emerging LNG markets, they have a good thing. They are markets that they are growing in size in terms of population. They have all the requirements that, we as if you are a LNG producer, you would look on those markets. So they have, some of them have a declining in domestic production. As I mentioned, there is a rising demand. As I explained, some of them were exporters, and now there is a need to supplement more of their demand. And of course, they're changing from coal to gas for environmental reasons. This is all good, but there is a lot of challenges. There are some challenges in these countries, especially because what infrastructure to be able to receive LNG, you need to have infrastructure in place. Not only a regasification terminal, but you also have to have your downstream well connected so you can send out the LNG that you are receiving, right? So this infrastructure is pretty much a key issue for the development of the LNG markets into these countries. So the government needs, there is also part of the government that needs to do its part in terms of creating policies that attract investors to invest in infrastructure and push the country to and support and create initiatives to push the country to import more cleaner sources of energy. So on this graph here, you will see that there is a lot of demand. If you think about if you add new infrastructure, and then if you don't add this new infrastructure, simply this demand that you'll see here for almost up to 40 BCMs, this demand either it won't be met or this demand will be fulfilled by coal and oil. So I hope that this doesn't happen, because we want life without a lot of pollution. It's changing the subject. So we now know who buys the key markets for LNG. We now know that it's not a global market. it's more of a regional type of market. And same thing happened with the price. So the LNG price, it's not a global price. So instead, the LNG price is indexed with the replacement fuel of ore, for in this case for LNG. It's basically a regional price, right? If you're for instance, if you are buying from the projects in the US, you're buying using mostly using the Henry Hub, which is a physical location. This is very important because this the fares from, for instance, the hubs in Europe, and we'll talk about this in the next bullet. That it's a physical place. So Henry Hub is a physical place in Louisiana. It's very close to the Texas border, and it's where the major natural gas pipeline converge, right? So, and that serves as the official delivery point location for future contracts on the NYMEX. So it's a physical location, and most of the LNG that you're buying from the US, you're buying with the price indexed to Henry Hub. Let's talk about NBP. NBP, differently from NBP and TTF, differently from Henry Hub, these are not physical locations, but they are the two most liquid gas trading point in Europe. So most of the LNG that goes to Europe, it's either indexed to NBP or TTF. And then we have the Japanese crude cocktail from Japan. So the Japanese crude cocktail, and this is the price that it's mostly used for LNG that has its home Asia. So normally they index it traditionally. The LNG prices that goes to Asia are indexed to oil prices. But this has changed, and we will see this in the next slides. And then we have Japan-Korea marker, which is Platts marker. So this JKM price, it's mostly used for short or spot sales transactions. So it reflects the spot market value of cargoes delivered into DE. X-ship, as I explained, X-ship is into the port of receiving terminal located in Japan, South Korea, and China. So this is mostly used for spot term transactions. And we will see a little bit more about JKM. This is the moment that you guys take a sip of water before we move to the next slides that we are going to talk about LNG market overview of what happened last year in terms of supply, LNG, who's importing, and everything. But because we just spoke about prices, I found that it's better to finish this topic at once. So you still have your minds fresh to hear this. So in terms of prices, this graph here shows the behavior of the price for spot prices registered last year, 2020. So most of the cargoes were trading in Asia, Atlantic and Asia Pacific basins, right? So as you can see from this graph, there's a significant oscillations of prices. And why is that? Mostly because prices were very sensitive. First, because of the lockdown. So the lockdown affected a lot the prices of spot market. So one is because with lockdown, most of the governments impose lockdowns, right? So in these key markets, the lockdown was such that the government imposed shutdowns and loss of energy consumption. So although it started well, what happened is that the prices of LNG got hit by that, and in the associated, so the key markets were not importing a lot of energy, mostly because the winter was not that cold. And then there was a lot of supply coming from the US, Russia, and Australia that is just flooded the market. So although it started well, because of these factors, a lot of supply was high, demand was low. So what happens is that it's reflected on the price. So the prices went down. It's not here reported, but the JKM, for instance, started the 2020 at about $5. And you see in the middle of the year, the JKM fell all the way to $1.83. So it's a huge, there was a huge impact of the price. So it started to recover, and then you can see this spike here by the end of the year. There was a huge spike on price. And why? Because, okay, there was no appetite for LNG, right? So what happened is that throughout this month, June, July, August, downstream market started to increase the price for electricity. And then on the producer side, what happened is that some of the projects that was supplying a lot of LNG to the market had technical problems. For instance, US, as you recall, last year, December, they had a huge outage. So that affected the supply of LNG. So now we are on the stage of the other way around. So we have a lot of demand and less supply, right? And what happened? This drove the prices very high. So it reached historical high, the JKM of $32 per MMBTU. And this was never reached by JKM in the history of JKM. So so you can understand how the market fluctuates. And this environment here, it's not good for project sponsors, especially for project sponsors who are trying to at least reach FID stage. Because why? The economy, the prices are low, so it doesn't help the economics of the project. And in that case, it hits the project very much when there is such low market, because everybody wants to get low LNG, especially those emerging countries. So they take advantage too of those low prices, because emerging markets, they have one particular thing. They are very price sensitive. So whenever there is this type of low prices in the market, they're trying to absorb as much as possible, right? So let's see how much actually these countries imported, right? So you see, I know this, the graph is it's very small. You can barely see, but this is actually sourced by the IGU, and I will provide you the sources of information that I took for this presentation. So they provide a lot of good reports on LNG market. So as you see, Asia is the home for LNG. So we have Japan here. Oh my God. So we have Japan. I believe this is Japan, considering the size. We have China. We have China here. We have South Korea, and we have India. So these, just these three, Japan, China, South Korea, they consumed a lot of LNG, and you can see that LNG import grew, reaching 254 million tons of LNG. So Japan remains pretty much leading the on the top of LNG imported, but we have to look for China. China will beat Japan if China keep consuming the way they're consuming. And I've seen some forecasts in the industry. If that forecast is reached, then China will beat Japan and will take the leading position as the most largest LNG importer. Okay, so you can see that there is some countries that import LNG. Europe as well. As I mentioned, Europe has a well-established downstream facilities. So what we have here, so this is just a snapshot. Again, this is from my IGO. This is just a snapshot, so you can have a broader view of what happened in terms of regas terminal. Regas terminal is the receiving terminal, right? So sometimes you can say receiving terminal or regas. Regas is regasification terminals, right? There was some regasification terminals that were planned to come on stream during the course of 2020, but COVID again made its magic, and some of those terminals were delayed, and maybe this year they will come on stream. So four new terminals were added in 2020, and 4 expansion projects came online were successfully conducted. These were pretty much infrastructures in China. And then we have 2 new FSRUs. FSRUs are pretty much receiving terminals that are on a ship, it's not a landed receiving terminal, but there are 2 receiving FSRUs that came online from Brazil and Croatia. And in total, you see there is 147 million tons of new regasification capacity under construction as of February. So this means that there is room for more LNG, right? There is still appetite for LNG. So let's talk about a snapshot of who export LNG. Who are those countries that export LNG? So the LNG export, it's led pretty much by Australia, Qatar, US, and Russia. Australia is in the first place with a lot of supply to the market. But some markets exported less volumes in 2020 than they did in 2019. So the reason for that is that it's a mix of technical issue, demand drops due to COVID-19 related restrictions, commercial challenges due to the price development, and feed gas challenges. So these, if you start linking the points, it links with the activities that you saw on that pricing chart that we discussed a few minutes earlier. So in terms of liquefaction facilities, let's see what happened last year. All of the liquefaction facilities added in 2020 were from US. There was not other facilities from elsewhere. So the US, they have projects, Freeport LNG, Cameron LNG, and Elba Island LNG. So they are all located in the US. But, you know, there is something very, very, very interesting that happened last year. So just 3 million tons in new production capacity came online. You know, 3 million tons of only 3 million tons. So 11 trains, if you think, hear me out, 11 trains that they can totally 87 million tons of capacity was expected to reach FID in 2020. And in practice, just these 3 million tons came online. So you see how the market, how these low prices can impact project developers, okay? We're talking about 87 MTPA that were supposed to come online. So let's look at these numbers. Let's look at these numbers, at this number that we're supposed to, projects that have either reached FID. So maybe I should explain, when you reach FID, it's when you have, let's say, green light from your lenders. They can provide you with the money. You have most of your agreements done. So you reach your FID when you have all of this, because it's all a link, So the construction contracts, the sales contracts, they all need to be put together successfully so you can deliver your project successfully, right? So that's when you reach FID. It's a major milestone in the LNG business. It's a big deal when you reach FID. So you can start, after you reach FID, you have the money, you can start building your plant, right? Talking about it, there are proposed 139 MTPA of liquefaction capacity, either under construction or that have reached FID. So you see on the import side, new regas facilities are being built, and on the supply side, new facilities as well are proposed or have all the necessary requirements to start construction and hit the market. And for those, you saw Mozambique flag in there, which I'm very proud of representing. So what we have here, so we have the major flow. This is pretty much what we have seen in the slide before. When we were talking about export and import countries. So these, I found it interesting to see. So you can have a clear look where the LNG is coming from and where does it go. So you can see here, US, Russia, Qatar, you see Australia are the major LNG exporter, right? And then you see where this LNG went, right? China, you see a lot of concentration in China. China is not here to play. So we have China, we have Japan, we have South Korea. So these are the major LNG importers, right? So this, I found it interesting. Let's talk about the supply and demand gap. So you see that slide that I've shown prices. It's interesting that because it also deals with supply and demand, you know, how it affects the project developers, how it affected also the buyer side, right? So this is a forecast made by Shell. So annually they produce this energy outlook. It's a I should strongly advise you to have a look at it. So they produce this, and they estimate that at about 2040, the demand will double to approximately 700 million tons. So it's a huge when you start comparing with the current demand, right? So, but of course, Asia will continue to play a key role on this demand, driving the demand to grow, and mostly because of the urge of these countries to switch from coal to gas. So we see that, but this gap may occur in, say, 2030, as it's seen in the graph, because you have what we have seen in the previous slides, we have less production coming on stream than projected. You see on the previous slide, 3 million tons of out of 87 million tons that were proposed came online. So for project sponsors, they mostly look for this gap, where this will be an opportunity again to lock long-term contracts, because it's where the demand will open again. So now the market is flooded all the way to 2030. So by then, if you're project sponsors, you want to have a look, you have to pay attention to this so you can plan ahead how you're going to do your market, how you're going to approach the market, and you have everything ready so you can sell your product during at this gap, right? It's a very important and interesting chart. This one, it helps in terms of projection for the project sponsors to plan. Okay, we are going pretty much to the end of this presentation, but before we reach the very end of this presentation, let's talk about some changes, right? Maybe I should have spoken about these previously in the first slides, but I thought that maybe by absorbing what I've just shared with you, you would be able to follow me on this one. So we have traditionally the LNG prices were linked to oil, mostly because it's these countries, the Japan, Korea, Taiwan, were trying to substitute oil for LNG. So predominantly the business was done through project suppliers and the end users, right? And then it was a point-to-point transaction. So liquefaction facility, receiving terminal, and we're talking about roughly 20 years commitment, right? Now we are seeing a different reality in the market. There's a lot of players. Why? There was a time, first US drove a lot of the changes in the market. Why? Because first they were supposed to be importers of LNG. So they built their regasification terminals to be able to receive LNG. So they created all of this thing. They were ready to receive, but then they started developing shale gas. So there was a huge shale gas revolution in the US. So it kind of like, instead of importing LNG, they became exporters of LNG. And what exporters of LNG? Like, they didn't come to play. So they became exporters of LNG. By doing that, they had impacted the traditional way of pricing the LNG. So instead, because buyers thought that, wait a minute, why am I indexing my LNG using to oil, which is expensive, by the way, rather than using perhaps Henry Hub? The gas is coming from US anyway. So they started using different indices for pricing LNG. So they started playing around with the Henry Hub, with the NBP. So it becomes, instead of oil-linked prices, it becomes what? Sometimes oil-linked prices still prevail in today's market, but now you're seeing the development of LNG pricing, right? You're seeing more, say, hybrid pricing, where you combine oil pricing and Henry Hub, oil index and Henry Hub, for instance. So you have a mixture of the two worlds, right? And then they are redefining the traditional LNG contract structure. So there is no longer such thing as point to point. So buyers, they want to be able to intervene more in the market. They want to be able to have more destination flexibility, so they can take, mostly if you are doing FOB, so then they can take LNG and they can better manage their portfolio. They can send it to whatever terminal that they want. So they want that flexibility, and they want that because they believe that would allow them to better manage their portfolio. And then price review, because sometimes prices are good for the buyer, but when they are low, but it's not good for the project sponsors. Sometimes prices are high, and in these instances, the buyers don't like it. So, but project sponsors, they do like it. So in terms of this, to combine all of these, they created likelihood for price review, where you can review the price, let's say for a certain period of time, 3 to 5 or 10 years. It depends on the duration of the contracts and what they agree. So there is a lot of changes. So in terms of volume, they diversifying their risk. They can buy, they may buy short volumes in a short period, for a short period of time. So now, when you start approaching your buyer, you guys have to define what long term means, because traditionally long term would mean say 20 years. Now long term can be 15 years or 13 years. So the LNG market is changing, it's evolving. So you see here, this is just two different aspects that I'm bringing to you for you to share with you. So what you have here is the average duration of long and medium-term contracts. So you see, there is no longer 20 years commitment in the LNG business. So what they're saying, they're reducing the commitment, reducing the volume, but also diversifying their sources of supply, right? So they can have what? They can have the security of supply to meet their highly demanding energy consumption, right? And then you have the term contract indexes. So you can see from this graph that oil still pretty much prevail in the LNG pricing mechanism. You see, all the way to 2020, oil in this blue is still very much predominantly being used on LNG contract. When you say term contract indexation, you're talking about long-term contract. But you see, if you see hybrid, it's also gaining some momentum in the mixture of LNG pricing. JKM, as I mentioned, it's not common to use in the term contracts. Rather, it's used in a spot transaction. So you see a lot of hybrid, a lot of oil, a lot of Henry Hub driven by the U.S. Market, and then you have the European hubs also in the mixture. So the structure of the price is evolving as the LNG industry is also evolving. Guys, well, there is a lot. I could just save one session just to talk about buyer's market. You know, the countries that are exporting, that are importing LNG. So these only is one topic to be discussed in a session. So there is this. I try to summarize as much as possible, and I hope you found it interesting. And this is just a slide that I put forward just to show you where I found the information. All the information that I provided here is public domain. There are good sources of information for the LNG enthusiasts. So Gignil, IGU, Oxford. I'm not here promoting, but I'm just sharing with you my sources so you also can do your own research and learn about the industry. And maybe we can have fruitful discussions about it. Who knows? So, and then there is Shell. So with this, I have reached the end of my presentation. I'm gonna turn on the camera and see if my hair is still in place. So it looks like it. So I hope you guys found it interesting, and let me know if you have any questions.
Well, I would say congratulations, Loide. Your presentation was outstanding, and thank you very much for your hard work. And as I said, usually when we speak about the LNG, what comes into our mind is engineering services and process, and it was really good to have this insight about the market. And because in the end of the day, the LNG is a product. So as much as we work, in the end of the day, we will need a seller and a buyer. And thank you for giving us these insights regarding all the thinking and analysis that goes around in this area of the LNG. So we actually have a lot of questions from our participants. So I will start with Jocelyn Machevo. She said, what are the pros and cons of having the delivery point at the outlet flange of the FLNG plant versus having at the inland flange of the receiving terminal? That is the risk of the transportation costs.
What are the pros and cons of having the delivery in the receiving terminal?
And at the outland flange of the LNG plant versus having it at the inland flange of the receiving terminal. That meaning the risk of the transportation costs.
Oh yeah, of course there is transportation costs, but if you decide to go through that structure of your business, which means you are responsible to take the LNG all the way to the receiving terminal, you have the LNG vessel. So you can optimize your production in a certain way. You can optimize your volumes. So if, for instance, there is force majeure on that receiving terminal, you can go to another one. You can sell your volumes if you have volumes available in your plant, right, to sell it. You can sell your volumes in the market. If you have excess volume in your plant, you can sell those volumes in the market. By having the ship allows you to do that, to optimize your production. If you don't have the ship, then if there is excess volumes, then you would have to charter those ships monetarily. So it would cost you more money than when you have a ship in your business structure.
Okay, thank you. Jocelyn, in case you're pleased with your answer, I would appreciate if you could say something in the Q&A or in the chat. And if you're not, I think you can add another question on top of that one. And after that, we also had a question from Bartolomeo. And he asked, what do you mean with LNG quality? I think that was in the first or second slide, if I'm not mistaken. He was asking, what do you mean with LNG quality? Presence of other components rather than C4, thermal, capacity, etc. And he also asked, is BCM standing for billions of cubic meters?
Yes, for the question number two. Question number one, regarding the LNG quality.
Yes.
So the LNG is comprised, of course, with methane, hydrogen, nitrogen. I'm not actually very technical on this side, but the quality, there are certain requirements in terms of percentages of nitrogen, methane, oxygen, hydrogen that the buyers want, so that they can better distribute the LNG when they receive it. They can better distribute the LNG in their downstream market. So that specification needs to be preserved as much as possible if you want to sell your LNG to the buyer. So the vessel also plays a key role to that in keeping the LNG chilled and as much as possible according to the specification, because when you are negotiating the SPA, you actually share, if you're a project producer, you actually share your gas specification to the buyer, so they can discuss that. So whenever there is a specification that it's an outlier or it's not part of the buyer's facilities, they both have to negotiate and see how they can perhaps overcome it. So
Okay.
it's also something that it's negotiated and seen during the negotiation phase.
Okay, so that would mean that the LNG quality is highly dependent of what the client requirements are for the specific project. I said that would mean that the LNG quality is highly dependent of what the client already defined as.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. We had another question from not a very well identified user, but I will read it. He asked, so what could be the most appropriate or recommended strategy to negotiate the LNG contract from seller-buyer point of view, since the contracts are mainly long-term contracts, considering the fluctuation of the Henry Hub, Brent, GCC, and etc.?
Okay, so thank you for this question. So what we have here, the best approach to negotiate, considering those different price benchmarks for LNG, right? So normally what you do, if you're a project sponsor, you have your project costs, right? And you have your break even. So when you are negotiating your contract, you know how low you can get in terms of price, right? You have, this is the minimum price that I can accept in order to underpin my project. If I don't get this price, then I won't be able to underpin my project. So you can play around with the price benchmarks. Whenever it's oil price is indexed to oil, or it's a mixture of Henry Hub, oil, or NBP TTF, whatever it is, it needs to be something that makes sense to you as a project supplier, and something that makes sense to your project to underpin, or else you just won't be able to move forward with the transaction.
Okay, thank you. Another question from the same user. He asked, what is the assertiveness or the risk level of the demand forecast done by Shell?
Well, I have no details about the demand and the assumptions that they used for that demand. It's something that it's been public, and of course, each project sponsor, they have their own analysis, and they have their own view on supply and demand gap, and what is the best time to approach the market if you are chasing the market, right? So that shall demand supply and demand gap. It's very much just to show you that there is this mechanism, there is this in the market, and it's public, and you can use it, and you can see roughly what's going on in the market and what can be the future of LNG market. What will happen? So you now can see that there is that gap. It may be right, it may be wrong, you never know. But there is that gap at that time, that it is an opportunity for project developers. That's what that slide is saying.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from Jocelyn. From a Mozambican NOC perspective, and considering the volatility and unpredictability of our market and investments, how can we make the LNG SPAs lighter to the NLCOs in emerging markets and still economically viable to the sellers? Taking the case of Mozambique, for example. I believe.
Oh, okay. I guess this question is because I mentioned that the emerging markets are price sensitive, right? Emerging markets are price sensitive. If you think about the Mozambique case, we are exporters. We are in the way to be an exporter of LNG. So these are greenfield projects. So which means that these projects are being constructed from the scratch, right? We are developing these projects. So to do that, because we are starting from the scratch, we needed to have credit-worthy buyers, right? So at this point of time, since we are underpinning our project, it's very unlike that we would go for the emerging market, first because they don't pay the price that it's needed to underpin the project, and second, they are not still not credit-worthy buyers, right? So they don't provide enough confidence to the lenders that their commitments were going to be fulfilled, right? So they don't provide that. So how can we approach these markets knowing this? So we won't be able to underpin our project. But for instance, in future stages, when we have our projects up and running, we want to optimize. We have other projects coming on stream in the country. So we would be able to take that risk of what? Because we don't need, maybe we won't need financing. Who knows? Because we are just expanding the current project. So in that sense, you may not need that criteria of credit-worthy buyers because you already have that. You underpin your project. You have your project up and running. You just want to optimize and sell as much as you can from your project. So in that sense, in that stage, you can look at those category of buyers and maybe become much lighter in terms of price and take pricing risk, for instance.
Okay, thank you for your answer. Jocelyn already said that she was clarified at least in the first answers, so hopefully she will reply back to this one with her insights and if she understood or not. Following up, we have another question from our not very well identified participant, but he asked, can you make some correlation between the 2018 term contract indexation and world demand fluctuation?
Well, first I have to think about what happened in terms of price on 2018, right? I have to think about what happened in terms of price in 2018 and what drove that price to go up or down, so we can see. Mostly, if the demand, the basic is if there is a lot of demand and less. And if the demand is high and demand is high and the supply is very low, then that can drive the prices high, right?
Yes.
The supply is low, that can drive the prices high. And that otherwise, that can drive the prices down. So in terms of pricing in those, 2018. I was about to say it in Portuguese. In 2018, I would have to see to think about what was the price on that specific time.
Okay.
But I must say that there was a lot of there was a US shale gas in the market at that time, and also there was a lot of supply. There was a lot of supply from the market coming from US, and it might be that the prices were, I don't know. I have to think about that because I need to. You want me to make calculations in here?
Don't. And regarding the previous question from Jocelyn, she seems satisfied with your answer. So now we are going to move forward with a question from Noma Karma. She asked, most of the hydrocarbons buyers are committed to complete the energy transition within almost 20 years. So to which extent the LNG will be needed during this period? And another question, if this energy transition accelerates, where are the upcoming gas projects in Mozambique sustainable?
Well, I believe LNG will still play a key role during this energy transition, because it's not easy to have the complete transition to energy, let's say, clean era. So there is a lot of investments that you need to do in the market to be able to do that. So I believe by that time LNG will still play a key role, even more, because most of these countries are reducing or either are shutting down coal-fired power plant. They are switching completely to gas. So I believe LNG still the fuel of the future for that sense, and will help a lot of countries to stop burning coal to generate power. If the energy transition accelerates, are the upcoming gas projects in Mozambique sustainable? They're very well sustainable because of what I have just said. LNG will still play a key role in the energy mix.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Jocelyn from the LNG Outlook. Considering the delays on the Mozambique onshore LNG project, is there a particular window that if we miss the project might lose the capacity, the attractability? If yes, what is the window in years?
If we miss this opportunity, well, if you look at the slide that on the supply and demand gap, you'll see that until 2030, the market still oversupplied. So from 2030 onwards, there is a gap. So if you take that slide from Shell, it's telling you that the gap, if we miss this opportunity, that's going to be the gap. Of course, each project sponsors has their own views on that gap and where that gap sits in terms of supply and demand.
We have a question from Talumba Katawala, and she asked, what type of external factors affect the LNG price? I believe this was while we were presenting the slide with the snapshot from 2020.
What we have seen here, on that, if you guys recall that slide that I've shown, the price fluctuations, it shows some things that can affect the price. Government decisions, especially COVID now. COVID is hitting companies, it's hitting us all, to be honest. So it affected the markets as well. So if the government, they do shut down countries, they do shut down industries. No, they do shut down, for instance, in the key markets, they shut down some industries. So that can affect the price because it affects also the appetite from the buyer to look for LNG. So also the weather. If you think about the key markets for LNG, the weather, the season also, the season of the weather affects the price. In the winter, the tendency is for the key markets to look a lot for LNG. They need LNG because they need the electricity to produce heat for them. And the winter can be very, very severe. So in that sense, that also can affect the price. So these are some of things that we have seen that also when there is a lot, for instance, there's a lot of supply, there's a lot of LNG in the market, or there is a lot of appetite from the buyer in the market. So that also can affect the price of LNG.
Okay, thank you. Valdo asked, what are the pandemic negative impacts on the gas imports?
First of all, let's talk about regas. If I mentioned about regas terminals, right? So yes. Some of the regasification, which are the receiving terminals that it's used to receive the LNG, some of the plans were already delayed because of the government shutdown. So they couldn't receive the equipment to build that infrastructure. So that is a negative impact. It affects the market. It affects the projections of supply and demand. And also, if you think about that price also chart that I've shown, there was a time in 2020 that the government had shut down and there was loss of energy consumption in the key markets. So what was it? So what happened? The appetite reduced because they didn't have anywhere to put the LNG that they would receive because they were in shutdown. So what happened? The DOM energy source, what they make they're starting to rise the prices. So what happened then? They went, also the buyers, they say, hey, no, instead of paying high prices, yes, because we don't have enough LNG, enough gas, let's buy more from the market. So that also affected the market. The market, when I say it affected also the downstream market. So instead, it was the price is high, so they had to import more LNG, and that's why the LNG, there was a lot of fluctuation in terms of LNG prices.
Thank you. Vanessa Valente said, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank you for your presentation. And then she moved to say, as we learned in the previous meetings, there are a couple of technologies used to liquefy the natural gas. I would like to know if they influence the price determination. I would like to know as well if the distance between the country where the gas is produced and the market takes any place into that price as well.
When you are considering your project, your LNG project, what you do, you have to do your base cost assumptions, right? And either you have to use your price assumptions and your cost assumptions. I meant to say. So your cost assumption. So your cost assumption, if you want to be a LNG producer, so it needs to take in account the liquefaction technology that you are going to use to liquefy your LNG. So that is a part of the whole. It's a packet. So it's part of the packet. So that part as well as other components of the project are taken into consideration when you say, yes, this is the minimum price that I can take from the buyer, right? So it takes into account all of these. And if you consider taking the shipping risk or taking the LNG to to the market. So it means that also you need to fraction that this part of shipping costs that goes as well to your capex. So all of these can helps you determine the minimum price that you can take from your buyer. So all of this is taken into account.
Okay, thank you. We have a question also from Jose Gonçalves. He said, it's evident from your presentation that the demand is going to increase between 2025 and 2030, and we have projects waiting for FID here in Mozambique. So what's your opinion about that?
I know that we have projects waiting for FID in Mozambique. I cannot talk about much about those specific projects, but if there is demand, there is demand. If the price is attractive, if project sponsors are able to secure buyers, then there's a lot of potential for Mozambique too, also to reach FID under those circumstances.
Okay, thank you. A question from Nelson, I'm sorry. He said, hi, talking about selling, how can I approach a buyer who is far away from my network? And I remember you spoke about how it's important to establish a bond between a seller and buyer, and mostly now because of COVID and the travel restrictions. Nelson is asking, how can I approach a buyer who's far from my network?
Okay, first of all, I don't know how you want to approach a buyer. If you are a project sponsor, well, I will share some of my experience. If you are developing a project, especially a greenfield project, so you have to make a lot. You have to market your project. You have to sell your project. By selling your project, you have to create visibility to your project. How do you create this visibility? Through conferences, to forums, to websites, you have to engage with people. And as much as you engage, and also you have to approach, the good thing about conferences and this type of sessions, as this one, Saga, is that you get to know people. So when you get to know people, you have more chances to meet your buyer. And also, if you're a project sponsor, you have to have in your team people that are already in the market, people that know the market, so that they can bring up, because it's, as I explained, it's very relationship based. When you contact someone, when you meet somebody in the industry, you keep the contact, and then you keep you keep engaging with this person, because you don't know when exactly you're going to need to reach out to them. And when you have alongside you people that are already in the business, they know the ways, they have contacts, they know which companies to liaise in order to liaise and see, hey, this is a good company, this is a reputable company that it's been in the industry for years, and they have a good track record. And also you have advisors. So it's a whole team. It's a whole team. And I do not know if you're talking about you personally. If you want to reach somebody that is far away, then I would advise you to use maybe LinkedIn. LinkedIn has been approaching people in a very efficient way.
Okay, thank you. Patricia Kirimo said, excellent presentation, thank you. And Zapata said, regarding the LNG selling price, as far as I understood, it depends on the maturity of the market. Can you elaborate further on that topic?
So what I meant to say when with the maturity of the market. So the maturity of the market pretty much defines how the downstream is established, right? I mentioned, okay, the oil market, everybody knows that it's well established, and there is buyers and sellers everywhere you can sell your product. Gas, you need infrastructure. So the maturity of the market, when I mentioned, is that it's pretty much saying that these specific points, these specific regions have a very well established gas pipelines, gas storage, and they are very well developed in that sense. So they can trade LNG in the system through the hubs. So they can trade, how can I say that? They can transfer the title of your gas in the system through the hubs. So these are very well interconnected pipelines infrastructure. That's why I said the US and Europe are very well established markets. And then you have the oil price, which everybody knows about.
Okay, thank you very much. So I have one question of my own. I would like to know what is your advice for young graduates who would like to join this area, and how can they develop the skills? And for you in specific, how was your insertion into this specific area, and how did you manage to get mentorship, or it was one of those cases where you practically had to become your own mentor and guide yourself through?
So advice for the newcomers and advice for the people that are okay, for the newcomers. It's a very interesting industry because it's a very unique in a sense that there is a lot of specificities that are just for this type of business. And I would encourage, there's a lot of reading required. There's a lot of people engagement if you want to pursue a career as a marketer. So there is a lot of it's a relationship base. So I would encourage you to attend most of these forums. I would encourage you to reach out to people like me so I can give you more advice. And I'm always open. I am on LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to share my experience. I must say that was very hard for me in the beginning. The LNG market was totally new for me. So I had to learn from the basics. The basic is definitions. I had to learn from the definition, what is LNG. Yeah. So I had a good mentors. I had a very good mentor, and he supported me very much during the beginning of my career. And then also, you need to be proactive. You need to chase things. You need to chase information. There is a lot of information available, so you need to show interest for those type of things. And whenever there is a conference, and there is always opportunity for you to go there to meet people. Meet people is key in the industry. So meet people, network, talk people on the LinkedIn, promote yourself on these platforms, and participate in this kind of forums. For me, it is key in this industry. Information is key. So you need to be able to, and also to meet people. I think it's very, very important.
Thank you very much. I can still receive compliments from the audience. So thank you very much for your presentation. And we even managed to unravel the mystery of who was J101. It's Elma da Conceição. Thank you, Elma, for your participation.
Yeah, thank you, Alma. I miss you.
Thank you very much for all the participants. Thank you, Loide, for joining and presenting this magnificent field of the sales and marketing. And I know that at this time you're probably supposed to be sleeping, but you're here sharing your knowledge. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, MWA, for promoting this space where we can learn with each other. And just so that everybody can know, these videos will be available on our YouTube channel, probably in the upcoming weeks. So if you need to revise anything, you can always check it back. And Loide is here. You can follow her on LinkedIn and, you know, start that networking process. She will probably, I mean, I'm sure she will reply to the questions, because at Mozambique Women of Energy, we support each other. So I'm pretty sure that she will push you to grow and empower you and give you more knowledge so that you can develop your careers. So thank you very much. We're almost reaching 2 hours. So I think this is the end of our section now. Thank you very much, Loide, and thank you for all the...
All right, thank you. Thank you, Cilla. If anything, guys, just let me know.
Bye.
All right, bye. Thank you.